As the sun sets over thatched rooftops and golden fields, a gentle hush falls upon a medieval village. Work tools are set aside. Weary hands are washed in cool well water. In the fading light, peasants gather in small clusters, the burdens of the day giving way to anticipation of the night's simple pleasures. Contrary to the harsh image often painted of their lives, medieval commoners had more leisure than one might think. Generous holy days and seasonal lulls meant many breaks from labor. One estimate from 14th century England found that a servile laborer might work only around 27.7 hours a week on average. With chores done and twilight deepening, these villagers finally have time to play, and play they will. In this gentle twilight hour, the stage is set for merriment, mischief, and myriad strange amusements that will carry them through the dark of the night. Now, soft laughter and murmurs ripple across the green. A cool breeze carries the scent of wood smoke and hay. Crickets chirp in the hedgerows, providing a nocturnal chorus as neighbors trickle in. The scene is warm and communal, an entire village exhaling after a day's toil. Children scamper barefoot, chasing one another, their giggles piercing the dusk, while elders settle onto wooden benches or grassy knolls, sighing contentedly. For these medieval peasants, such moments of respite are precious. Free from the Lord's commands and the Church's rituals, they create their own entertainment. And what unusual fun they have! Games with peculiar rules, lively dances, rough sports, rustic songs, absurd plays, and even blood-curdling spectacles. By the dim glow of hearth fires and under starry skies, they indulge in secular delights that to modern eyes may seem strange indeed, yet to them bring comfort, laughter, and a sense of community. In this script, we journey through those gentle nights and festive days across medieval Europe, from England's village greens to France's market squares, from Italian carnivals to Scandinavian winters, to discover the curious pastimes of peasants at play. Each chapter will immerse us in a different form of unusual entertainment, all rooted in historical fact, but narrated with a calm, atmospheric tone, as if told by a fireside storyteller. Let the stress of our world fall away. Imagine instead the distant shouts of a village game, the faint melody of a pipe, the aroma of spiced ale, the feel of earth underfoot as dancers circle a bonfire. With a reflective and lightly poetic voice, we will explore strange things people did for fun in medieval times, illuminating how even in an age of hardship, common folk found joy in creative and sometimes bizarre ways. So settle in comfortably. Picture the dim glow of lantern light flickering on timbered cottage walls. Hear the low hum of conversation and the occasional burst of mirth from the village green. The hour grows late, but the night's amusements are just beginning. In hushed and gentle tones, let us step back through centuries to observe these medieval merriments, peculiar, endearing, occasionally rowdy, but always a testament to the human need for laughter and leisure. Our journey commences on a mild spring evening, under the ancient oak on the village common, where something out of the ordinary is about to unfold. Chapter 2: Festivals and Fairs. Merry-making through the seasons. In the heart of spring, on the 1st of May, the village bursts into life with a celebration as old as memory. Dawn's light reveals ribbons of bright cloth streaming from a tall maypole erected on the green. Boys have been up since first light to cut a young tree and fix it in the earth. and now girls bring garlands of wildflowers to entwine around it. By afternoon, work ceases and a carnival mood takes over. Lively tunes from a fiddle or pipe start up as neighbors join hands in a circle around the maypole, stepping to the rhythm. The May Day festival is one of pure secular joy, a remnant of pagan spring rites where dancing around a tree ensured fertility and good harvest. Laughter rings out as the dancers weave in and out, braiding the ribbons in complex patterns around the pole. Their faces are flushed with exertion and delight. It's a time for courtship, too. Many a young couple steals off into the blooming woods after the dance, straw in their hair and smiles on their faces, a fact that later made Puritan moralists frown on these merry May Day revels. But for now, in the medieval village, it is innocent fun under the warm sun and the budding trees, a day when social tensions ease and everyone celebrates the renewal of life. As seasons wheel on, each brings its own festival. In high summer, after planting and before the hardest harvest work, come the midsummer festivities. On St. John's Eve in late June, villagers build a towering bonfire in the central clearing. As dusk falls, the fire is lit, flames leaping to illuminate joyous faces. Young men compete to see who can leap the flames, or the glowing embers, most bravely, while others toss dried herbs or even animal bones into the blaze for good luck, giving rise to the word bonfire, literally a bone fire for midsummer. The air is rich with the scent of smoke and pine. Children dart about waving sparklers made of sticks tipped with glowing embers. Amid the crackle of firewood, you can hear music, a drum pounding softly, a rustic flute piping a carefree tune. Old folk nod in time, remembering their own youthful midsummers. This night feels almost enchanted, a secular carnival under the stars where mirth and superstition blend. In England and France, some villages perform little skits or mummings on this night, telling the legend of St. George and the dragon or other tales, using the bonfire's glow as their theater lights. But mostly people sing and dance in the flickering light, celebrating the peak of summer with carefree abandon. When the harvest is finally gathered in autumn, it's time for the Harvest Festival, another occasion for revelry. In a German or English village, the last sheaf of grain, the corn spirit, might be fashioned into a corn doll or wreath and paraded around. The entire community then enjoys a hearty feast outdoors. Long wooden tables are laid out with coarse bread, sharp cheese, roasted root vegetables, and perhaps a freshly butchered pig slow-cooked over coals. Ale flows freely from barrels, and everyone, from the poorest serf to the village headman, eats their fill. With winter's scarcity looming, this is a time to indulge. As twilight deepens, the after-dinner fun begins. Men and women, arm in arm, perform circle dances on the threshing ground, kicking up dust and laughing. Someone strikes up a bawdy folk song that all know by heart, and soon dozens of voices join in chorus under the crisp autumn sky. The Harvest Festival is earthy and jubilant, a well-earned respite after months of toil, filled with jokes, music, and communal warmth. Traveling peddlers and entertainers often time their visits to coincide with such festivals. On market day during a fair, the village might host a small fairground of sorts. Picture a fair in medieval France or Flanders, brightly colored tents popping up in a field outside town, goods laid out for sale, barrels of honey, bolts of dyed wool, tin trinkets. Amid the commerce, entertainment thrives. A wandering juggler tosses wooden balls and knives to the oohs and ahs of a gathered circle of children. Nearby, a puppeteer on a wooden platform makes cloth figurines enact a silly story, perhaps a fox outwitting a farmer, to bursts of laughter. There might even be a trained animal show, a man with a nimble dancing bear on a rope, the bear clumsily imitating human dance steps to the delight of spectators, and the bear rewarded with sweet treats. At larger fairs, one could find all manner of odd amusements, fortune-tellers reading palms or casting bones, fire-eaters breathing plumes of flame, or a contortionist bending in uncanny ways. For peasants whose lives rarely extended beyond their own village, the annual fair was a window to a wider world of marvels and mirth. It broke the monotony of daily life and allowed everyone to socialize and celebrate together. Fairs attracted all classes. A peasant family might rub elbows with a traveling merchant or a curious noble in disguise. But on the fairground, all were united in enjoyment of the sights, sounds, and tastes of the day. Even in the smallest hamlet, people found reasons to celebrate secularly. Weddings, as we'll explore later, were one such reason for prolonged feasting and fun. But there were also just impromptu village parties, perhaps after a particularly good crop yield, or on a clear night when someone produced a fiddle, and others could not resist a dance. Through all these festivals and fairs runs a common thread: community joy. These gatherings strengthened bonds among neighbors. The memory of shared laughter at a May Day, or the collective awe at a juggler's tricks, sustained them through hard times. The amusements might seem quaint or odd to us now. Dancing around trees, throwing bones in fires, watching a bear dance, but they fulfilled a deep need for diversion and delight. As night falls on our village festival, one can see the bonfire embers glowing and hear the last strains of a folk song blending with the chirp of crickets. Under a sky full of ancient stars, medieval peasants found moments of magic in the mundane, transforming ordinary village greens into worlds of festivity and fun with the turning of each season. Chapter 3. Music and Dance Under the Stars. On any given evening after supper, the sound of music might drift down a village lane, drawing people together. Music, dance, and song were essential parts of medieval peasant culture, woven into the fabric of daily life. In a world without recorded sound, live music held a special enchantment. Imagine a small circle of villagers by a crackling fire under the night sky. One man produces a battered lute or a simple fiddle. Another taps a homemade drum. A young woman's voice rises in a clear melody, singing an old ballad everyone knows. Soon, others join in harmony, their voices melding in a traditional song passed down through generations. Group singing is common. Families and neighbors sing while brewing ale, at work in the fields, and of course during leisure. These are songs about clever foxes and wayward husbands, about youthful love and the coming of spring. Some are rowdy drinking songs, others lullabies or haunting storytelling ballads. Whatever the tune, singing together brings comfort and camaraderie. Around that fire, as flames dance in their eyes, the peasants feel the bonds of community strengthened by each familiar chorus. When music plays, dancing often follows. Medieval dances among common folk were typically simple and communal. One popular form was the carol, where dancers held hands in a ring and moved in a circle, singing as they went. The steps were repetitive and easy to learn, perhaps 3 steps forward, 1 back, allowing everyone from children to gray-haired elders to join without fuss. By firelight on a summer's eve, or inside a barn on a winter night, such circle dances created an atmosphere of joyful unity. We can picture it. Dozens of villagers forming a ring, laughing as they step in unison, skirts and tunics swaying. Someone might clap to keep time, and the whole group claps on the refrain. It's a gentle, hypnotic scene. The shuffling feet and clapping hands illuminated by golden firelight and echoed by the starry vault above. In some regions, folk instruments accompany the dancing. A pipe and tabor, a 3-holed flute played with one hand and a small drum with the other, is a favored combo for dance music. Its bright piping and steady beat carry well in the open air. Bagpipes, too, were common in medieval Europe among shepherds and peasants, filling the night with their droning yet strangely stirring sound. In the Alps or Scottish Highlands, a bagpiper might strike up an energetic melody and set villagers prancing in lively reels. Meanwhile, in Italy or southern France, rustic tambourines and fiddles might drive the rhythm for a fast dance under the grape arbor. Each region has its own flavor of dance. The Italian peasant's swift saltarello, full of hops and leaps. The French branle, where dancers sway side to side in a line. The English country dance, a simple forerunner of later contra dances, with lines of couples stepping patterns. Regardless of form, these dances are above all social. Partners are swapped, everyone gets a turn, and there's much good-natured teasing. A lad may deliberately misstep to provoke giggles from his partner. A grandmother might suddenly execute a surprising twirl to cheers from onlookers. Sometimes dancers don costumes or use props. In parts of England, especially by the late Middle Ages, troops of villagers performed a dance called Morris dancing, an energetic step dance with bells strapped to their legs and waving handkerchiefs or clacking sticks. The dancers often wore quirky outfits, ragged strips of cloth, flower garlands, and sometimes antler horns or hobby horse costumes. Their jingling bells and rhythmic steps added a percussive music of their own to the summer air. While Morris dancing likely evolved from older traditions and became more codified later, its roots in medieval village revels are plausible, essentially a joyful exhibition of communal spirit and fertility blessings for the community. In Scandinavia, similarly, peasants at midsummer might don leafy branches or wear carved wooden masks as they danced around the midsummer pole, believing it helped ensure the land's fruitfulness. Indoor dancing was common in the colder months. Imagine a longhouse or common barn in a Norse village during Yule, the winter solstice season. Snow piles high outside, but inside the hall, torches flicker, and the air is warm with body heat and the scent of spiced ale. A fiddler scrapes out a lively tune while a drum beats steadily. Men and women link arms for a round dance on the packed earth floor, their boots stomping in time. They dance to keep warm, to defy the long darkness outside, and to express gratitude for being together. Even when space is tight, they make do, dancing in place or in small groups. In one corner, children invent their own little jigs, clapping and spinning until they collapse, dizzy and giggling into piles of straw. Music also accompanied work, blurring the line between labor and leisure. Harvest songs, spinning songs, plowing songs, these helped pace the work and lighten the mood. But when work was done, the music took on a freer, more playful character. We might hear a cheeky tune with saucy lyrics at the tavern, or a haunting flute solo by a shepherd boy on a hill. Notably, professional or semi-professional minstrels wandered the countryside, bringing fresh music to villagers who could afford to host them. These traveling musicians might sing heroic epics or love ballads accompanied by lute. Yet the villagers themselves were often talented in their own right. Many could play a homemade flute or drum, and singing was nearly universal. To the medieval peasant, music and dance were not luxuries, but necessities of the spirit. They soothed aches, bonded communities, and provided an emotional outlet for joy and sorrow alike. After a day of bending backs in the fields, a spirited round dance or a soulful song by the hearth could rejuvenate the soul. The tone of these gatherings was usually upbeat and inclusive. Even those who couldn't dance, the very old or infirm, would clap along or simply watch with contentment as younger folk whirled by. In such moments, class distinctions faded. All were peasants together, after all, and even gender roles softened. Everyone took equal part in the revel. When the music finally died down, perhaps near midnight, and dancers caught their breath, there was a deep satisfaction in the silence. One by one, with fond good nights, the villagers would drift back to their cottages, hearts light, humming the night's tunes. Under the quiet canopy of stars, the village would sleep. But the promise of another music-filled evening soon would always remain. Through music and dance, these medieval commoners spun joy from the threads of everyday life, creating memories and traditions that would echo down the ages. Chapter 4: Rough Games and Rowdy Sports. By day, or in the early evening, when energetic youths needed to blow off steam, medieval villages often turned into informal playing fields. The games they played could be delightfully chaotic and sometimes shockingly rough. One of the most popular was a primal form of football, not the organized sport we know today, but a wild melee known variously as folk football or game ball in England and la soule in France. Picture a sprawling contest between two villages or rival teams of locals. An inflated pig's bladder serves as the ball, and the field is not a neat pitch, but the very landscape itself, from one village's outskirts to the others. There are almost no rules. The objective? To carry or kick that pig's bladder to a goal, which might be the opponent village's church door, market square, or a particular tree. Dozens, if not hundreds of people join in, practically scrumming around the ball. Young men shove, grapple, and charge, muddy and determined, as onlookers cheer and laugh. It's a spectacle of good-natured violence, tumbles into ditches, occasional fistfights, clothing torn, but rarely any lasting injuries beyond bruises and a black eye or two. One unspoken rule: no killing allowed, anything short of that goes. This medieval soccer could last for hours, surging through fields, over fences, even through streams. Participants emerge covered in mud and sweat, utterly spent, and grinning ear to ear. Such games typically took place on special days, like Shrove Tuesday or holidays, when work was paused and everyone was free to join or watch. They were rowdy, yes, but also a cathartic communal exercise, a way to release pent-up energy and village rivalries in a mostly harmless manner. Another vigorous sport, especially beloved in Celtic lands like Scotland and Ireland, was a form of stick-and-ball game resembling field hockey or hurling. In Scotland, it was called shinty, and in Ireland, caman or early hurling. Two teams wielded curved sticks to hit a small, hard ball, trying to drive it towards a goal, often just a marked area or between two posts. These matches could be just as boisterous as folk football. Players swung their sticks with zeal, sometimes whacking shins as often as the ball. Strategy was minimal. It was more a test of speed, strength, and hand-eye coordination in the midst of a frenzied scrum. Spectators, basically the rest of the village, would line the makeshift field, shouting encouragement. Despite the apparent anarchy, skill was admired. A nimble player who could flick the ball up and run while bouncing it on his stick's end, or who could send it sailing far with one strike, became a local hero. After the game, villagers might even carry the best players on their shoulders in celebration. It wasn't purely about winning, it was about the thrill of contest and the collective revelry that followed. Wrestling was another widespread pastime across medieval Europe, often seen as both sport and friendly trial of strength. Peasant men, and sometimes women or teenagers, would challenge each other to wrestling bouts during fairs or gatherings. There were various styles. Some regions favored grappling at the waist, trying to throw the opponent to the ground. Others permitted holds on any part of the body. Wrestling matches typically took place on grass or threshing floors, where a fall would be less injurious. A circle of onlookers forms, clapping in rhythm or shouting, "Have at it!" Two burly farmers step forward, strip off their outer tunics to wrestle in shirts, and clasp hands. After a tense moment of circling, they lunge and lock arms. Muscles strain, feet dig into soil. Each man tries tricks, a swift leg hook, a sudden twist, to topple the other. Eventually, one goes down with a thud amid cheers and good-natured jeers. It's common for multiple rounds to be held, with the victor taking on a new challenger until someone stronger or more cunning defeats him. In some villages, wrestling contests were formal enough to award a simple prize, perhaps a meat pie or a small purse of coins for the champion. But often bragging rights were reward enough. According to historians, medieval peasants loved pure wrestling so much that nearly any game might spontaneously devolve into a wrestling free-for-all. Everything devolved into wrestling, as one medievalist quipped. Indeed, after a football match or festival dance, it wasn't unusual to see young men tumbling about in pairs, laughing as they pinned each other in mock combat, while their friends egged them on. For those who preferred tests of precision over brute force, archery contests were a favorite sport, especially in England, where longbow practice was not only encouraged, but eventually required by law. On Sundays or holidays, villagers might set up a simple target, a hung wreath, a painted mark on a barn door, or even a fresh loaf of bread on a post. Competing archers would step back a determined number of paces and take turns firing their arrows. The bows are homemade or village-crafted, the arrows fletched with goose feathers. There's a hush of expectation as a shooter draws his bow, the wooden creak and taut string slicing the silence. Then thwack! The arrow strikes, maybe close to the center, maybe wide. Applause follows a good shot, playful groans for a poor one. Because archery had practical stakes, a skilled archer could defend the village or bring home game. These contests carried respect. Victors were admired for their steady hand and keen eye. An English chronicle notes that in the 13th century, Even commoners would compete in grand archery contests at fairs, sometimes winning handsome prizes like a ewe or a modest sum of money for the best shot. But in the village setting, prizes were simpler. The satisfaction of splitting the target or a friendly wager of ale for the winner. Young boys watched avidly, itching for the day they'd be strong enough to draw a bow themselves. In the meantime, they held mini-contests with toy bows, or by seeing who could shoot a straw across the farthest distance, mimicking their elders. Beyond these major sports, medieval peasants enjoyed a host of simpler games of agility and strength. Stone-throwing contests were common. Who could hurl a hefty rock the farthest, or hit a distant post. Many a brawny farmhand earned local fame by throwing a stone beyond the oak tree or clear across the brook. There was also the hammer throw, swinging a blacksmith's hammer or a heavy mallet around and letting it fly, an ancestor of the modern hammer throw event, albeit far less regulated in medieval times. These activities doubled as improvised training for war, perhaps, building strength and aim. But for the participants, they were mainly fun and a way to compare prowess. In the evenings, lads might engage in quarterstaff bouts, sparring with long wooden staves. Two friends face off, twirling their stout staffs, trying to tap the other's shoulder or leg. It's half fencing, half folk dance as they circle and parry, wooden poles clacking in the still evening air. A sharp rap to knuckles might end a match with yelps and laughter. One unusual competitive pastime recorded in some places was water jousting, a clever peasant twist on the nightly sport of jousting. Lacking expensive horses and armor, peasants took to boats. On a calm river or pond, two teams each manned a rowboat. In the prow of each boat stood a jouster, armed with a long pole, while his comrades rowed furiously to gain speed. As the boats charged towards each other, the jousters aimed to knock their rival into the water with a shove of the pole. A great splash and roar of laughter ensued when someone toppled overboard. Far safer than real jousting and delightfully silly, water jousting allowed commoners to parody and participate in the nightly sport in their own way. Records show this was hugely popular right across the continent, not only as a game, but a subtle way to poke fun at the pomp of knights. Crowds would gather on the banks to watch, betting small coins on outcomes and shrieking with mirth each time a drenched knight floundered to shore. On a hot summer day, even the losers found it refreshing fun. Across these rough games, an observer feels the robust vitality of peasant life. There is sweat, dust, sometimes blood, but also hearty laughter and camaraderie. The tone in the village during such sports is typically boisterous and carefree, with the whole community often involved as players or spectators. Women might join in some activities. Historical accounts mention women playing ball games or wrestling other women now and then. But more often they cheered, refereed, or prepared celebratory jugs of ale for after the match. Children turned every available space into playgrounds as well. They played tag, hide and seek among haystacks, and a game called hot cockles, where one child, eyes covered, had to guess who hit them from behind, a favorite in medieval times for kids and even adults at parties. As dusk falls after a day of games, the participants nurse their scrapes and bruises with pride. The winners of the football might parade through the village with the pig's bladder trophy on a stick, singing a teasing song at the losers who will get their revenge next holiday. Those bested in wrestling shake hands and share a drink, planning a rematch when their backs feel less sore. A contented fatigue settles on the community. The rough games have done their job, spent excess energy, entertained everyone, and reaffirmed bonds. Lying in bed on such nights, a villager might smile, recalling a funny moment, the look on a neighbor's face as he landed backside in a puddle, or the cheer that went up when the target was split by an arrow. These rowdy sports provided the thrill and spontaneity that balanced the repetitive grind of farm work. In the quiet that follows, the medieval village returns to peace, knowing that when next the opportunity arises, they will eagerly gather again to play with the same rough and tumble exuberance. Chapter 5. Tests of Skill and Chance. Games of dice and boards. Not all medieval fun was physical or boisterous. When muscles tired or weather drove folk indoors, peasants turned to games of skill and chance to pass the time. By the glow of a hearth or the dim light of tallow candles, they huddled around rough-hewn tables to play board games, dice, and other amusements that tested wits or courted fortune. These quieter games provided a cozy counterpoint to the chaos outside, a more focused, intimate kind of fun that often involved friendly competition, a bit of gambling, and plenty of banter. One ubiquitous game was dice. Carved from bone, wood, or stone, six-sided dice were easy to carry and could be played anywhere, from tavern bench to cottage floor. Peasants loved a dice game called Hazard, which was popular in England and France. Hazard was a rather complex betting game, so much so that King Alfonso X of Castile once codified its rules in the 13th century, that in simpler form is an ancestor of modern craps. Two or more players would cast dice and wager on the outcomes, calling out numbers like "set on 7" or other arcane terms. The game's allure lay in its unpredictability and fast pace. Fortunes, albeit small coin fortunes, could turn on a single toss. Though officially gambling was frowned upon or even banned for peasants under certain kings, enforcement was lax in a village alehouse far from authority. On long winter nights, the local alehouse likely saw many a clandestine dice tournament. The clatter of dice on wood, the sharp intake of breath as they tumbled, then groans or cheers depending on the result. These were familiar sounds in the medieval darkness. A chronicler notes that despite attempts to restrict gambling to nobility, such a law was almost impossible to fully enforce, so dice games were rife, particularly where there was beer. Indeed, dice and ale went hand in hand. After a few tankards, even a cautious soul might be persuaded to wager a penny or two on a lucky throw. While a serious loss could sting, a week's earnings lost on one bad roll, more often bets were tiny and meant simply to spice the game. Win or lose, the real reward was the excitement and camaraderie around the table. By the fire's glow, faces intent, peasants momentarily seized a sense of agency against fate with each shake of the dice cup. Medieval people also enjoyed board games that exercised strategic thinking. A game called Nine Men's Morris was extremely popular. This game, which resembles a more complex tic-tac-toe or checkers, involves two players each with 9 pieces, often pebbles or bits of wood, placed on a board with a grid of intersecting lines. The goal is to move pieces and form mills, 3 in a row, to remove the opponent's pieces. Boards for Nine Men's Morris were sometimes carved directly into church pews or the tops of barrels, evidence of how widespread it was. Excavations and manuscripts indicate peasants played it avidly. It's easy to learn, but has enough strategy to remain engaging. Two friends might lean over a makeshift board scratched in the dirt, each plotting moves, pretending nonchalance while trying to anticipate the other's plan. Onlookers weigh in with unsolicited advice. Don't let him mill there, adding to the fun. Similarly, a game called Fox and Geese was a medieval favorite. In this asymmetrical board game, one player controls a fox piece while the other has a gaggle of geese. The fox's objective is to eat geese, and the geese try to pen in the fox. This game likely provided metaphoric satisfaction, a clever underdog fox outwitting the flock, or vice versa, perhaps echoing folklore tales. In some parts of Europe, especially Scandinavia and the British Isles, people still remembered older Viking board games like Hnefatafl, a strategy game of attackers and defenders around a king's piece. By the later Middle Ages, chess had also arrived and filtered down from nobility to common folk who could get their hands on a cheap set. A literate priest or traveling merchant might teach villagers the basics of chess, kings, queens, knights, and such. And before long, a carved wood or bone chess set could become a prized community possession. Chess was considered a noble game and educational. It teaches strategy and the reality of power dynamics, as one commentary noted. But peasants enjoyed it for the challenge. Perhaps at the local monastery's gatehouse, lay brothers and villagers might sit to play a leisurely game of chess on a rainy afternoon, pondering each move deeply, while children peered in fascination at the carved figurines battling on the board. Another simple but engaging pastime was knucklebones, essentially an early form of jacks. Children and adults would toss and catch the bones of pigs or sheep, trying to snatch up others from the ground before catching the tossed one. This game, referenced in sources like Bruegel's painting of children's games, could absorb players for hours, honing hand-eye coordination and eliciting shrieks of laughter when someone fumbled. It required nothing but a few animal ankle bones, hence knucklebones, which were readily available and conveniently shaped. The medieval tavern, or alehouse, was a prime venue for such games of skill and chance. In England, laws eventually required that every village have an archery butt for practice, but also cracked down on indoor games when they got out of hand. King Richard I notably forbade commoners from gambling at dice altogether in the 12th century, theoretically reserving wagering for knights and lords. But as we've seen, villagers found a way to play regardless. In a smoky tavern corner, after a long day, a group of farmhands might squat on the floor, casting dice in a circle. Perhaps they use a wooden bowl to keep the dice contained, each clinking roll accompanied by murmured invocations to Lady Luck. A couple of older men might instead be engrossed in a game of drafts, checkers, moving black and white stones on a grid drawn in charcoal on the tabletop. They stroke their chins and argue about rules. House rules vary from shire to shire, after all. There were even card games by the very end of the medieval period, as playing cards entered Europe in the 14th–15th centuries. A peasant lucky enough to have a deck, perhaps gifted by a traveling soldier or purchased second-hand in a town market, could introduce games like trump or pochen, early poker, to his village comrades. Those games would truly bloom more in the Renaissance, but their seeds were sown in late medieval taverns, with folks gambling over hands of crudely printed cards. Games of chance did sometimes lead to mischief. Fights could break out if someone felt cheated in dice. Accusations of using loaded, weighted dice were not uncommon. The church frowned on excessive gambling, linking dice to the casting of lots by Roman soldiers for Christ's robe at the crucifixion. Hence, gambling was seen as sinful. But moderate play was generally tolerated as an innocent recreation. In fact, some dice games incorporated prayers or references to saints as a way to lend legitimacy to the luck. For instance, shouting, "Saint Hubert, guide me," before a throw when hunting, or invoking Saint Cucuppus, patron against chance and dice, in jest. Gambling among peasants was usually for low stakes: a bit of food, a drink, small coins, or tokens like pebbles that could be tallied later. Even so, the thrill of possibly winning or losing something added zest. One source notes that male peasants would often gamble away meager earnings on dice, to the chagrin of their wives. Ale was easy to stake. "I'll wager a quart of ale my throw beats yours," so the loser had to buy the next round, which kept everyone convivial. Interestingly, medieval villagers also enjoyed word games and riddles, a more cerebral form of play. They would pose riddles for each other by the fire. Solving a clever riddle or pun elicited appreciative laughter. In some cultures, a tradition of flyting, a contest of trading creative insults in rhyme, was popular among all classes, from Scottish courts to peasant gatherings. Two friends might engage in a mock insult battle, each trying to outdo the other with outrageous, witty slurs, all in good fun. The others serve as audience and judges, roaring with delight at a particularly sharp barb. This was essentially a medieval rap battle of words, showing off verbal skill. The fact that peasants enjoyed such word-sparing reminds us that their entertainment wasn't all rough and tumble. They took pleasure in humor and intellect as well. Ultimately, these games of skill and chance offered medieval commoners an accessible escape from routine. By candlelight in a snug cottage, a family might play a simple board game after supper, the children learning from their elders. In the local inn, dice and drink might make a cold evening bright with mirth. Even out in the fields, shepherds played at knucklebones or small betting games to while away time. The stakes were low, but the enjoyment high. Each toss of dice or turn of a game piece added a little suspense to lives that could be otherwise predictable. And importantly, games brought people together across age and gender. A grandfather taught his grandson 9 men's Morris. Women might quietly bet on which man would win the next toss in the tavern, stifling smiles. Girls and boys played tag or stick-throwing games in the yard, mimicking adult contests. The medieval village, in its free hours, was alive with play, from the loud, muddy sport of the green to the soft clatter of dice in the hearth corner. In those moments of play, the burdens of subsistence living lifted briefly, and luck and laughter ruled the hour. Chapter 6. Taverns and Alehouse Amusements. When darkness fell or cold winds blew, the social heart of many medieval villages was the alehouse, a humble tavern where neighbors gathered to share home-brewed ale and company. Stepping inside, one is greeted by a haze of smoke from the hearth and tallow candles, a medley of voices, and the yeasty aroma of beer. Rough wooden tables and benches are scattered about, perhaps an ox yoke or farm tools pushed aside to make room. Here, in the warm, dim interior, peasants found a different kind of recreation. Drinking, storytelling, singing, gambling, and jovial camaraderie that could turn a simple tavern night into a memorable event. Drinking was a pastime common to nearly all, men, women, and even children. Ale was often safer than water. After a long day, a tankard of frothy ale brought a pleasant relaxation. Medieval ale was typically a thick, mildly alcoholic brew made from barley or oats, sometimes flavored with herbs. Peasants actually brewed much of it themselves. A good housewife might be famed for her ale recipe. On certain nights, however, people flocked to the alehouse either because a new batch was ready or simply for the cheer of gathering. The church ale, a strong brew sold at church fundraisers, was a particular treat on Sundays, but secular ales were enjoyed throughout the week. Once the first few cups were downed, the mood in the tavern grew merry and uninhibited. Tongues loosened. That quiet plowman in the corner might suddenly burst into a ribald song, slapping the table in rhythm. Others would join in, for medieval folk loved to sing as they drank. Many alehouse songs were delightfully irreverent and earthy, celebrating the joys of drink, poking fun at husbands or wives, and making light of daily hardships. A 15th century English song captures this spirit in its chorus. "Bring us in good ale, for our blessed lady's sake," while verses humorously list all the things ale is better than, from milk to water to wine. In the tavern, everyone roars such refrains in unison, mugs raised high. It's a communal letting go, a brief equality under the influence of drink. Lords might have their fine wine in manor halls, but here in the village tavern, ale is the great leveler and comforter of the poor. Getting drunk was easy, cheap, and a good way to deal with the grimness of medieval life, one source wryly notes. Indeed, ale provided both calories and courage. As the night wears on, cheeks flush and laughter flows as freely as the brew. With a bit of alcohol fueling the fun, games and pranks abound. We've already seen dice and betting games thrive in this environment. A friendly wager on anything, which raindrop will slide down the tavern window fastest, who can recite a tongue twister without stumbling, could spark impromptu contests. Some played a game of pitching pennies or quoits inside, tossing small coins or rings to land as close as possible to a mark. Loser buys the next round of ale, naturally. Taverns were also hotbeds of storytelling and gossip, so much so that churchmen complained alehouses were where slander and idle talk bred. Picture a charismatic peddler or old soldier holding court at the head of a table, ale in one hand, gesturing animatedly with the other as he tells a tale. Perhaps he spins a dramatically embellished account of a local ghost sighting or a far-off battle. The listeners are rapt, interjecting "I" and "oh" in all the right places. They savor a good story as much as a good drink. In these moments, reality and fiction blur. The tavern becomes a stage where everyday folks momentarily become kings, knights, or saints through the power of narrative. It's worth remembering that with low literacy, oral storytelling in venues like taverns was a prime form of entertainment and news. A wandering storyteller might earn his supper by enthralling the tavern with a bawdy fabliau or a heroic saga. In exchange for endless refills of ale and perhaps a warm place by the fire for the night, He gives them escape into once upon a time. The humor in taverns skewed earthy and communal. A favorite type of joke was a practical joke, or mild humiliation that everyone could laugh at. For instance, an unsuspecting fellow might have his stool pulled away as he goes to sit, resulting in a tumble and peals of laughter. Or a sleeper who dozed off drunk might wake to find his hand dipped in warm water as a prank, a medieval precursor to certain sleepover pranks of today. There's much backslapping and friendly mockery. The hapless victim often laughs too, for in a small community one must be able to take a joke. Innocent flirting is also common. A group of young men might serenade a bashful maiden with a humorous song, or vice versa. A group of wives might teasingly admonish the men with a parody of a well-known tune about drunkards. These playful interactions strengthened social bonds and eased tensions. A farmer could laugh with the miller who overcharged him earlier, and that laughter served as a kind of social glue. Of course, alehouses could sometimes get rowdy, or brawls could break out, hence that Atlas Obscura title about peasants enjoying brawling. Fueled by ale, an old grievance or a jealous look could escalate. Many taverns likely saw the occasional fist fight. Interestingly, chroniclers note that communal brawling was almost a pastime in itself, a spontaneous sport erupting from merriment. A friendly wrestling match might suddenly involve half the patrons in a heap, not out of anger, but the sheer exuberance of the moment. One medieval historian observed that peasants had a particular penchant for communal brawls, and that it's wrong to think their lives purely miserable when clearly they were also really into having fun this way. The tavern keeper would let it go on until a stool or jug got broken, then intervene with a stern broom or a shouted threat to water down the ale henceforth if they didn't behave. Soon enough, the combatants would dust off and be back to clinking tankards like nothing happened. Another form of alehouse amusement was music on demand. Many taverns had a house minstrel, or at least someone adept with a fiddle or harp. For a few coins or a free drink, this musician would strike up tunes to entertain the crowd. Ballads about Robin Hood were extremely popular. Peasants relished hearing about an outlaw who stole from the rich to give to the poor. A minstrel might sing a known Robin Hood ballad, and others would quietly sing along on the chorus. If a traveling minstrel band arrived, it could become a real occasion. As noted earlier, the arrival of wandering entertainers was a major highlight. In the tavern's intimate setting, musicians also tried to satisfy requests. A sad love song for the heartbroken lad at the end of the bar. A rousing dance tune if a couple of people felt like a jig in the limited floor space. Some taverns even had a bit of dancing. A small circle dance or jig if space allowed, feet thumping on the wooden floor as others clapped. One delightful custom in some English taverns was the Yule toast, from toasting bread in winter. A piece of spiced toast was floated in the wassail bowl or ale pot, and when the company drank, they'd sing wassailing songs and retrieve the toast to give as a gift or prize. This is the origin of why we say toast for a celebratory drink. In medieval practice, it turned a simple round of drinks into a festive ritual each Christmas season, complete with song and sharing of the sops, soaked bread. And who can forget the in-games that emerged spontaneously? One popular tavern challenge was shooting arrows or throwing things indoors. Yes, it's as hazardous as it sounds. They might set a target on a wall and take turns flinging a small knife or shooting a short arrow from a stool across the room. The combination of inaccuracy and inebriation surely led to some close calls, which only fed the excitement. Perhaps this is why many taverns of later eras switched to games like darts, an evolution of medieval target throwing, but with smaller, safer missiles. In medieval times, though, they made do with what they had. "Let's see if you can hit that crack above the door with your bodkin," a man might challenge, coins on the table. Laughter erupts as the knife lands nowhere near, or someone hastily ducks a ricochet. Despite occasional disorder, taverns were cherished havens. They provided warmth, physical and emotional, a release from daily drudgery, and a place to share stories, fun, and fraternity. The atmosphere ranged from raucous on feast days to quietly companionable on normal nights, where a few neighbors might just sip and chat about the weather and crops. There was a saying in later medieval England, "The tavern is poor man's parliament." Here, peasants could voice opinions, joke about the Lord's folly, or lament taxes, relatively freely among themselves. Such venting itself was a sort of grim fun, gallows humor to cope with difficulties. As the night wore on, and the embers in the hearth glowed low, the revelers would drift home one by one, perhaps a bit unsteady on their feet, but light in spirit. A ploughman might softly sing to himself an alehouse tune as he staggers down the moonlit lane, the taste of malt still on his tongue. A group of friends might escort each other, arms linked, still chuckling over an earlier jest. The tavern's door finally shutters, and silence falls except for the creaking signboard swinging in the breeze. The villagers have had their fill of ale and laughter, for tonight at least. In the new day, work will resume, but they carry with them the solace that when evening comes again, the alehouse will welcome them with open arms and frothing cup, ready to dispense that most precious medieval medicine. Good cheer. Chapter 7. Fireside Tales and Village Storytellers. When the nights grew long and cold, and the fields lay barren under frost, medieval villagers turned inward to the warmth of their hearths. In those dark evenings, one of the greatest entertainments was the art of storytelling. Picture a peasant family and a few neighbors gathered around a crackling fireplace in a one-room cottage. The only light dances from the flames, casting tall shadows on the walls. Outside, a winter wind may howl, but inside all ears are tuned to the voice of a storyteller weaving a tale. This was a time before radio or novels for common folk. Stories lived and breathed in spoken words, their power magnified by the imagination of listeners. A good story could transport everyone far beyond the confines of their simple lives, into realms of adventure, humor, or wonder. Often the storyteller was an elder, a grandmother with a trove of folk tales, or a grandfather recounting local legends. Other times it was a wandering bard or minstrel who happened to be in the village, and was offered a hot meal and ale in exchange for a night of stories. According to accounts, storytelling was likely the most fun peasants had, given how central it was to their leisure. They didn't need special equipment or fine settings, just a willing teller and keen listeners. It was common for peasants to have a do-it-yourself attitude to entertainment, and storytelling epitomized that. They entertained each other with only memory and creativity as tools. Imagine on one such night, the local storyteller begins a favorite fable, the tale of the cunning fox and the foolish wolf. Children inch closer, eyes wide. The storyteller modulates his voice, high and squeaky for the fox, deep and growling for the wolf, eliciting giggles as he mimics the animals. The fox in the story tricks the wolf out of a juicy piece of meat, and the wolf ends up howling in frustration. The children clap, delighted that cleverness won over brute force. Such animal tales, often akin to Aesop's fables or local folklore, were very popular, teaching simple morals while amusing all ages. For the adults, there were spicier stories, fablio full of comedic trickery, ribald love triangles, and scatological humor. Medieval villagers, far from being prudish, adored toilet humor and sex humor in their tales. A classic example might be a story of a gullible husband and a crafty wife who outwit each other in increasingly absurd ways, ending with someone falling into a cesspit or getting locked out naked, material that would cause uproarious laughter around the fire. These are the same themes found in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, or French fablio, but simplified in oral tradition for general consumption. The storyteller might lower his voice conspiratorially at the naughty bits, prompting knowing chuckles from the adults while children look on puzzled or amused without fully understanding. It was a shared catharsis. In a tale, one could poke fun at authority, at marriage woes, at bodily functions, in a way that real life didn't allow so freely. Some storytellers were itinerant professionals, or semi-professionals, known as bards, minstrels, or troubadours, depending on region. In exchange for food, coin, or lodging, they delivered epic tales, perhaps the Song of Roland or King Arthur's exploits, in serial form, night after night. Peasants who could not read might still become intimately familiar with these grand narratives through such performances. A bard might sing or chant parts of the story with a lyre, making it almost musical. In a rustic Italian village, a troubadour might recite a romantic tale of knights and ladies that leaves the listeners sighing or dabbing eyes. Meanwhile, a German peasant gathering might hear a wandering minstrel recount a fragment of the Nibelungenlied or a local saint's miracle in lively prose. Storytellers were the bearers of news and culture, too. If a distant king died or a war ended, often villages learned of it only when a traveler included it as a tidbit in their storytelling session. Wandering minstrels were the medieval equivalent of a TV news channel, one might say, as they carried gossip and events from place to place. In many cases, villagers themselves would also exchange news as stories. A traveler returned from market in the nearest town would captive the cottage audience with descriptions. "Oh, you should have seen the juggler performing at the fair. He swallowed fire, truly, and there was a dancing goat." Or, "They say the king's men passed through 2 villages over, recruiting for war." These real events were narrated with the same flair as fiction, blending entertainment with information. And because most peasants rarely traveled, such accounts were thrilling windows to the outside world. Ghost stories and superstitions added another flavor to fireside chats. On a particularly dark night, someone might relate the tale of the headless monk said to wander the abbey ruins nearby, or a will-o'-the-wisp leading travelers astray in the marshes. Gasps and a tightening circle around the fire ensued. Perhaps a skeptic would teasingly make a sudden boo to lighten the mood, causing a momentary fright followed by laughter. In sharing these scary tales, they faced fears communally and found a strange pleasure in the shivers they induced. The cadence of storytelling in medieval times was usually gentle and meandering. A story could take hours with all the tangents and traditional formulaic phrases. Once upon a time, and it came to pass, in those days. No one was in a rush. Indeed, drawing it out was part of the joy, especially on nights when there was little else to do. It allowed everyone to savor the world of the story slowly, to add their own comments. I wouldn't have opened that door, no sir, and for the teller to gauge and play off the audience reactions. Interestingly, storytelling was not just passive for peasants. They often participated. Riddle contests might be embedded in a story, or the storyteller would pose questions. Now, what do you think the clever maiden did next? People would shout guesses, turning it into a group game. Some evenings were explicitly devoted to riddles and wisdom tales, where each person had to contribute a riddle or proverb, and perhaps explain it through a little anecdote. This interactive element kept everyone engaged and awake, even as the hour grew late. One special form of storytelling entertainment were the folk plays or mummers' plays performed by local men during festive seasons, especially around Christmas, New Year. While technically a play, they were essentially dramatized storytelling. A half-dozen costumed mummers would barge into the hall or open space and act out a well-known comic story, often involving a fight where a character like St. George slays a dragon or a bold knight fights the Turkish knight. Then a comic doctor revives the loser. These scenes were short, farcical, and included silly improvised lines and audience banter. The mummer's play plot usually has someone killed and miraculously cured, drawing cheers from children. This was a live narrative, but delivered in a broad, exaggerated style so everyone could follow. After performing from house to house, the mummers expected ale or coins, a practice sometimes called guising. Though simple, these plays delighted communities each year and broke the monotony of winter with a burst of color and laughter. As the night deepened, storytelling sessions often wound down into more personal reminiscence or quiet lore. Perhaps an older villager would tell of the famine winter when wolves came to the village edge, or how things were before the pestilence took so many, mixing history and memory with a touch of narrative flair. These stories were somber but cathartic, and the listeners might respond with solemn nods. Not all tales were jolly. Some carried the weight of collective experience and became a way to process grief or fear. Finally, there was a sacredness to the storytelling ritual. It was understood that while a story was being told, you showed respect, interrupting only at appropriate moments and not detracting from the teller's moment. Even the rowdiest lads would quieten, seated on the floor maybe, chin on hands, eyes fixed on the speaker. One could argue this was a form of worship of the imagination, a quiet, communal reverie not unlike prayer. In fact, in the midnight hours between first sleep and second sleep, medieval people often had biphasic sleep with a wakeful period at midnight. Those who stayed up would sometimes use that time for intimate talk or storytelling, believing the dead or spirits might be near and listening too. When at last the final story ended, perhaps a gentle moral about how love or honesty prevailed, a contented silence might fall, One by one, the villagers would stir, realizing how late it was, and praise the storyteller. That was a fine tale, thank you. The embers glow low. A child is already asleep against her mother's side. The listeners depart to their own straw beds, minds still abuzz with images of cunning foxes, brave heroes, or hilarious tricks. In their dreams, fragments of the stories may dance. The storyteller, if a guest, is offered a spot by the hearth to sleep, and he drifts off knowing he has earned his keep well. In this calm, reflective atmosphere, the medieval village night passes safely and sweetly. Storytelling not only entertained, but also educated and bonded the community. It preserved folklore, transmitted values, and allowed peasants, whose real lives could be tightly bound to one locale and social role, to roam free in their minds. Through Tales by the Hearth, they experienced vicariously the wider world of adventure and possibility, and found meaning and laughter to carry into the next day. Chapter 8. Bawdy theater and mummers' plays in the marketplace. While fireside tales were intimate and low-key, medieval peasants also enjoyed more public and theatrical entertainments. In village squares and marketplace corners, one could often find performers putting on little plays or farces, the sitcoms and comedy skits of the Middle Ages. These were usually secular, as opposed to the religious mystery plays the church organized on feast days, and they catered shamelessly to popular taste. Bawdy, farcical, and full of physical comedy. Common folk loved nothing more than a good laugh, especially if it came at the expense of authority or punctured the pretensions of daily life. Thus, a rich tradition of farcical theater flourished in medieval villages, particularly in places like France, Flanders, and Germany. Imagine a makeshift stage erected in the dirt of the marketplace. It could be as simple as a few boards on barrels or a cleared circle where actors stood. A small troupe of players, perhaps traveling actors or just local youths in disguise, announces a performance. Word spreads, and soon dozens of villagers gather, forming a ring. There is excitement. This is a break from routine, a show. The performers don crude costumes, maybe a pillow stuffed under a shirt for a fat-bellied character, a floppy hat for a fool, or charcoal smudges on cheeks for comedic effect. With exaggerated bows, they begin a farce, a short comedic play. The plot? Often delightfully absurd and indecent. One classic type of farce involves marital mix-ups, a lusty wife tricking her jealous old husband, a dim-witted priest being fooled by his parishioners, or neighbors conning each other over a pig. Medieval humor reveled in body functions and fart jokes, as strange as that may seem to us. Or perhaps not, since such humor persists today. A noted medieval historian, Eleanor Janega, points out that medieval people thought toilet humor and sex humor were the funniest things around. These plays just had a ton of fart jokes. True enough, surviving titles from French farces include gems like The Farce of the Fart and Shit for Brains. Imagine on the village stage, an actor playing a quack doctor pompously examining a bottle of urine that is actually from a cow, or another actor noisily breaking wind to get a cheap roar from the crowd. The peasants roar with laughter at this. It's humor they can relate to, utterly unpretentious. One farce storyline described by a scholar involves a merchant selling supposed magical ointment, which ends up being filth, and gullible customers thanking him lavishly. The audience would cackle seeing authority figures, or the well-to-do, often represented as buffoonish characters, made to look ridiculous or dirty. It was a way of thumbing the nose at social superiors under cover of comedy. Such farces were common at festivals or town fairs. In France, they had an entire tradition of these secular comedic plays during Carnival and certain civic feasts. They even had a Feast of Fools, where society's norms were lampooned, clergy and leaders were parodied in plays. Although Feast of Fools was a church context originally, the spirit spilled into the streets with secular skits. Peasants and townsfolk loved it. It was a sanctioned period to laugh at the world turned upside down, fools crowned as kings, donkeys leading processions, and actors on stage speaking truths through comedy. In England and other parts, mummers' plays and morality play parodies filled a similar niche. While morality plays were serious didactic dramas about virtues, often performed by guilds, villagers enjoyed twisting them into silly versions. A mummer play might have St. George fighting a Turkish knight in a clumsy sword fight, where both end up whacking each other on the bottom to laughs. Then a doctor comes in with a big syringe, or something symbolic, to revive the fallen with nonsense Latin. The exaggerated acting, a heroic stance, overdramatic death throes, etc., delighted the audience. Everyone knew it was make-believe and all in fun. The performers themselves often came from the community, especially during seasonal festivities. Take Christmas mummers. Typically a group of young men, sometimes dressed in bizarre costumes or in women's clothing for extra humor, who would go house to house or to the manor, performing their little play in exchange for food, drink, or a few coins. Their dialogue was usually rhyming doggerel, half improvised. A snippet might be, "Here comes I, old Father Christmas. Welcome or welcome not. I hope old Father Christmas will never be forgot." Then introducing each character in turn with a witty line. They would involve the crowd, bantering with the spectators or incorporating local gossip into the jokes. If the blacksmith recently had a mishap, the play's doctor might quip, "I cured the smith of clanging head after too much ale put him to bed," prompting guffaws. These performances were not high art, but they were highly entertaining for peasants hungry for a break from monotony. They also carried on folk traditions. For instance, the character of the fool, often dressed in motley with floppy ears or donkey tail, was beloved. He had license to say outrageous things. In some plays, the fool or a jester figure served as an MC, cracking jokes between scenes or making fun of audience members by name, much like a modern stand-up comedian working the crowd. Audiences roared at these personalized jests, even if they were at their own expense, because it was all part of the collective merriment. The painting, "The Laughing Fool," shows the kind of jovial, uninhibited laughter that such entertainers could elicit, capturing that spirit of the medieval jester whose role was to provoke mirth by any means. Notably, women did not usually act in these public plays. Female roles were played by men in drag. But women certainly attended and laughed along. In some farces, female characters, played by men, were depicted as smarter or craftier than the males, a subtle nod to the realities of peasant life, where women often had to be shrewd to manage households. One French farce has a wife cleverly outwitting both her husband and a would-be seducer, leaving both men in embarrassment. a storyline that likely got hearty applause from the wives in the audience. Traveling theater troupes also brought variety. There are records of itinerant players going around performing short dramas on biblical or legendary themes, but adding comic interludes to keep crowds. Over time, they developed stock characters: the braggart soldier, the greedy priest, the henpecked husband, the flirtatious maid, recognizable archetypes that villagers could immediately relate to and find funny. These are ancestors of characters later seen in Commedia dell'arte in Italy, 16th century, but their roots lie in medieval street theater. It wasn't all comedy. Sometimes there were spectacles and tricks. Fire-breathing, juggling, and acrobatics could be woven into performances. A small troupe might combine a farce with a short juggling show, for instance. Perhaps one character in the play magically juggles 3 knives to convince another, an impressive feat doubling as plot device. The lines between play and variety show blurred, all to keep the audience engaged. Occasionally, these comedic plays had biting undercurrents. They could satirize corrupt officials or poke fun at the church's hypocrisy, albeit thinly veiled. A farce from Bohemia, referenced by scholars, The Ointment Seller, mocked multiple groups: Jews, Germans, women, in ways that are distasteful now. But to its contemporary audience, it was comedic license to ridicule anyone and everyone. Such content tells us peasants relished even edgy humor as long as it was in the context of play acting where normal rules were suspended. Peasants were not into tragedies, as Janega notes. They wanted laughter, not solemn drama, from their theater. After a performance, the players would pass a hat, or simply rely on the host, a tavern keeper, for example, to reward them with supper and ale. The spectators drift back to work or home, but the jokes live on. You'd hear people repeating funny lines to each other the next day in the fields. "Did you hear how John played the nagging wife? I nearly split my sides." For weeks, a successful farce might be the talk of the town, and likely the villagers themselves reenacted bits for fun, or children would imitate the fool's silly walk and get a rise out of their friends. These theatrics served an important social function. They allowed a community to laugh together at shared issues: marital strife, greedy professionals, bodily functions, superstitions, thereby diffusing tension and reinforcing a sense of solidarity. We can all find this funny because we all deal with it. Public. Laughter is a powerful bonding force. Moreover, by occasionally sending up their betters, like making a mock priest character in a play drunkenly forget his prayers, they enjoyed a moment of psychological liberation from hierarchy. As twilight falls on the marketplace and the makeshift stage is dismantled, one can imagine lingering smiles on the faces of those who watched. Walking back to their cottages, they mimic a comic line or two, still chuckling. The day's burdens feel lighter. Even the gruff village miller, often irritable with customers, has a spring in his step after laughing so hard at the farce. In bed that night, a peasant might quietly replay a funny scene in his mind and grin in the dark. These bawdy little plays and mummer antics were truly medicine for the medieval soul. A chance to come together and, for a time, laugh at the absurdity of life, turning it into something communal and joyful. It was an antidote to the harshness and a reminder that even in a world of hard work and strict order, laughter could carve out its own holiday in the human heart. Chapter 9. Love, Courtship, and Foolish Customs of Courtship. Amid the games, work, and communal gatherings, the threads of romance and courtship wove a subtle tapestry of fun in medieval peasant life. Young people in the village found inventive, playful ways to flirt and seek out a potential mate, often under the watchful eye of the community, and often by turning courtship into a kind of game. In an era without modern dating or technology, their path to love was paved with folkloric customs, pranks, and little rituals that were as amusing as they were earnest. One popular courting game, especially in England, was bobbing for apples. Not the Halloween party game we recall, but an older tradition tied to finding one's match. At the Autumn Harvest Festival, or on All Hallows' Eve, a large tub of water would be filled and shiny apples tossed in. Each apple was secretly assigned the name of a village bachelor. Then the unmarried girls would take turns kneeling and trying to grab an apple with their teeth, hands behind their backs. Amid much laughter and splashing, a girl would eventually emerge with an apple clamped between her jaws, and the name of the lad associated with that apple was playfully said to be her destined love. Tradition held that if she caught it on the first try, the couple would be together forever. On the second try, they'd wed but have some trials. On the third, the pairing was perhaps doomed. These fortunes were spoken in jest, but one can imagine the mix of blushing and giggling as outcomes were proclaimed. The boys, of course, looked on with keen interest. It was a bit like drawing lots. A bold lad whose apple was caught might puff his chest and wink at the girl, to more teasing from bystanders. Such customs gave cover for young people to express interest without overtly defying modesty norms. The whole village treated it lightly. "Oh, Alice got John's apple. What a lark. Perhaps we'll have a wedding by next fall," they'd say, half joking, half hopeful. In an age when marriages were often practical arrangements, these little games allowed a romantic fantasy that fate or play could spark a match. There were many other love divination games. On certain nights like Midsummer or New Year's Eve, maidens might gather to peel an apple in one long strip and throw the peel over their shoulder. The shape it formed on the ground, perhaps a letter, was said to indicate the first initial of their future husband's name. In Scandinavia, folklore said that if a girl put flowers under her pillow on Midsummer's night, she'd dream of her future husband. These practices were tinged with magic and fun, a socially approved way for girls to dream about love and whisper about which boy made their heart flutter. Boys, on the other hand, engaged in feats or playful contests to impress the lasses. At festivals, there might be a strength game, climbing a greased pole, say, or racing each other with a girl perched on one's shoulders. The winner's prize was sometimes a kiss from a chosen girl, or at least a flower from her garland. In the folk imagination, the bravest or strongest youth winning a token of regard was a satisfying little drama. All of it was in good fun, yet these moments were charged with excitement for those involved. A shy couple might first truly notice each other during a round dance, or when paired in a game of blind man's buff, also called hoodman blind in medieval times. In hoodman blind, one person is blindfolded and spun around while others tease and dodge. If the blindfolded hoodman catches someone, they must identify who it is. It wasn't uncommon for a nimble maid to deliberately let herself be caught by the boy she favored, or vice versa, leading to much laughter as the blindfold is lifted and a faux surprised blush if their crush is in their arms. Certain times of year encouraged light-hearted romantic mischief. During May Day, not only was there maypole dancing, but also the tradition of going maying, where young men and women slipped into the pre-dawn woods to gather blossoms. These excursions had a reputation for flirtation. Couples wandering off among blooming hawthorns, returning with baskets of flowers and perhaps secret smiles. The community winked at this. Even Puritans later bemoaned that May mornings led to too many conceptions out of wedlock. But in the medieval village, it was seen as a natural, youthful frolic, with the assumption that serious courtship or marriage might come of it. Another curious custom was the appointment of a Lord of Misrule, or similarly a May King and Queen, among the youth. During certain festivals, a peasant man might be chosen to play king for the day, and he would select a queen, often a girl he admired. Dressed in comedic finery, perhaps a paper crown and a cloak of rags, they led the revels, dancing together and issuing humorous commands for others to follow. While largely symbolic, this pairing sometimes gave a legitimate couple a chance to shine and enjoy recognition. If the boy picked the girl publicly, that signaled his affection. For one day, a poor peasant lad could treat his sweetheart like a queen, literally. They dined at the head of the table in the feast, on maybe slightly better portions, and the whole community played along. It was whimsical and romantic play acting, and by next day they returned to normal, but perhaps with a strengthened bond. In the everyday, courtship was often conducted via sung ballads and secret visits. A boy might serenade a girl under her window at night, a practice found across Europe, from Italian stornelli to French chansons. If the girl liked him, she might drop a token, or at least not shoo him away. Storytellers and minstrels helped this tradition by spreading love ballads like those of Tristan and Isolde, or local lovers, fueling the dreams of youth. During daylight, flirting might be disguised as helping with chores, a lad volunteering to help a lass carry water from the well, both chatting shyly as they walk, or a girl bringing an extra loaf of bread to share with a boy plowing nearby. Such gestures were noticed by others, who might gently tease. I see young Thomas always finds a reason to be at the miller's well when Jane is there. This communal observation was part of the fun. Everyone became invested in potential matches. Of course, the line between fun and serious intention could blur. Sometimes communities organized bundling or courting nights, where a young man could visit a young woman at her home under supervision. In some traditions, they even lay in bed with a board between them or fully clothed, a practice meant to allow intimate talk without crossing propriety. While bundling was more common in later periods and certain regions, its spirit resonates with medieval courting benches or designated corners at gatherings where couples could converse. Not all courtship customs were gentle. Some were outright rowdy rituals. Consider the practice of the Skimmington ride, charivari, for mismatched couples, or marital discord. The community's noisy mock parade meant to shame and also amuse. If an older widower married a much younger girl, youths might bang pots outside their house in a teasing, rough music procession. It was half harassment, half carnival, an odd communal fun at the newlyweds' expense, urging them to conform to expectations. While not a game per se, it shows that even in courtship and marriage, medieval villages found room for boisterous social theater. Another fun ritual was associated with weddings themselves. Peasant weddings, when they happened, were one of the most celebratory times in a village, often lasting days. After the ceremony, which might simply be a vow exchange in front of kin, the real party began. Here, friends of the groom would often subject the couple to good-natured pranks on their wedding night. One documented custom: while the newlyweds were bedding, the villagers might gather outside their window to sing raucous, naughty songs and shout useful tips for their consummation. You can imagine the poor bride and groom laughing and groaning in embarrassment behind the thin cottage wall as their drunken friends holler rhymes about making babies. It was mortifying and yet communal, a way of sharing in the intimate milestone with humor. This tradition of night singing or charivari on wedding night persisted in various forms for centuries. Sometimes they'd even clatter pots or make animal noises. The idea was partly fertility blessing, partly ensuring no one took themselves too seriously. It was a ritual of inclusion. The couple was being accepted into the community of married folk through this teasing ordeal. By enduring it and perhaps tossing out a joke in return, they earned respect. Even outside of weddings, the boundary between romance and communal fun was thin. For instance, the festivity of St. Valentine's Day was not widely celebrated yet as later, but there were local customs of drawing lots for Valentines in some places by the late Middle Ages. A group of girls and boys might each draw a name from a hat, pairing them as sweethearts for the day, a playful precursor to formal courting. They'd exchange small tokens. Maybe the boy would wear the girl's favor, a ribbon on his sleeve. Hence, wearing your heart on your sleeve originates from such practices. Throughout all these, we sense a tone of gentle mischief and communal endorsement. The medieval peasant community was involved in every stage of life. One's choice of partner was not a wholly private affair, but a village concern. Yet rather than heavy-handed interference, much of their approach was in these playful customs that allowed young people to mingle and find affection under the cloak of games and rituals. It eased the awkwardness and gave structure to something as unpredictable as love. Of course, not all was rosy. Sometimes unrequited love or rivalry led to spats, or even real fights. Two lads might come to blows over a lass during a festival, requiring elders to break it up. But even that could be woven back into communal fun. The lads might be forced to shake hands and buy each other ale afterwards, turning it into a lesson in humility. As the seasons turned and the years passed, those who once bobbed for apples as giggling teens might be married couples now organizing the next apple bob for their children. The courtship games persisted, binding one generation's experiences to the next. They added sweetness and laughter to what could otherwise be a serious business of securing a spouse for survival. In the firelight of a harvest evening, a grandfather could tell his grandkids how he won their grandmother's heart by winning the greasy pole climb and earning a kiss. And everyone would chuckle while Grandma pretends to scold but smiles at the memory. These love customs remind us that even in a time often characterized as rigid or harsh, human warmth and playfulness thrived. Young medieval peasants dreamed of love and enacted those dreams in the only ways they knew, through the games and traditions passed down to them. With apple bobbing and serenades, festive pranks and Valentine lotteries, they infuse the act of finding love with levity and community spirit. It is late evening now in our village narrative. Perhaps somewhere on the edge of the green, two youths linger talking softly under a tree, while the echoes of the day's festivities fade. The stars above are bright, the air is cool, and in that gentle darkness a newfound bond might be forming, nurtured by the very customs that gave them the chance to connect. And if somewhere a wit in a tavern raises a cup to toast to the next wedding, the whole village would laugh and cheer, for in their world, love too was a kind of delightful game, one with the highest stakes, but best played with a light heart. Chapter 10. Winter Wonders, Skating, Feasting, and Fireside Comforts. When winter's chill descended on medieval Europe, life slowed and the days grew short, but that didn't freeze the capacity for fun. In fact, winter brought its own suite of strange and delightful pastimes for peasants, turning the cold and snow into a playground. Picture a small village blanketed in white, the breath of people misting in the air, and the nearby pond transformed into a sheet of ice. For those with warm woolen tunics and hardy constitutions, the winter landscape offered opportunities for play that the other seasons could not. One of the most enchanting sights was villagers ice skating on frozen ponds and rivers. Yes, medieval people did skate, often using simple skates made from animal bones strapped to their boots. The practice dates back at least to the early Middle Ages in Northern Europe, where long winters demanded creative ways to travel and have fun. The English monk William Fitzstephen recorded children flying like birds across the ice on bone skates in 12th century London. By the 14th century, metal-bladed skates emerged in the Netherlands, but those were luxury. Common folk still largely used bone or wood. So imagine a group of village youths strapping cleaned, curved animal rib bones to their feet with leather thongs. Using a stout stick in each hand to propel themselves, punting against the ice, since bone skates glide but don't cut. Off they go across the frozen surface. Their laughs echo in the crisp air as they gain speed. Some race each other, pushing with their poles. Others attempt simple spins or games of tag on the ice. The slide and whoosh of bone on ice creates a rhythmic whisper beneath their play. It was not only children, adults joined too for practicality and pleasure. A father might teach his daughter to skate by holding her hands and gliding slowly, her feet slipping until she gets the balance. Once confident, medieval skaters even played games. One recorded amusement was carving patterns like a figure eight into the ice and seeing who could do it most accurately. They also sometimes engaged in a kind of mock jousting on ice, using their poles to gently joust or race each other. There are accounts from the Low Countries of winter skating races with prizes like silver spoons or a new pair of shoes for the victor. For peasants, a competition on ice was a welcome break from monotony. Spectators bundled in cloaks cheered as young men and women, red-cheeked from the cold, sped from one end of the frozen lake to the other. In one race described by Olaus Magnus, a Swedish writer of the 16th century recalling older traditions, The course could be many miles long, and the prizes quite substantial, a horse for first place. Even if such grand events were rare in a tiny hamlet, smaller scale races or last one to the bend of the river is a goat type dares were surely common. Skating was as much a social gathering as a sport. People would bring sleds with firewood to light a bonfire on the shore, perhaps roasting apples or chestnuts while others skated. In the magical glow of fire on snow, with stars overhead, the village bonded in a special way during winter. Storytelling often happened around such fires, and the reflections of flames on the ice with skaters swirling past must have made a beautiful, almost fairy tale scene. But not all winter fun was graceful. Some was downright rough. Throwing snowballs is an age-old winter delight, and medieval kids and adults certainly engaged in snowball fights. A sudden flurry of activity might break out after a snowfall, shrieking children darting between huts, pelting each other with soft snow missiles. Sometimes it escalated to teams, one half of the village's youth against the other, each building a snow fort or barricade and defending it. It was all fun until inevitably someone took a snowball to the face and howled, at which point a parent might scold the bunch for being too wild. Yet even the adults would crack smiles, recalling their own youthful snow battles. Sledding, too, was practiced in its simple form, using sledges or just large oxhide or wood planks to slide down hills. If the village had a gentle slope nearby, you can bet the young, or young at heart, made use of it after a fresh snow, shrieking as they belly flopped on a sled and sped downward. In the flat fens of the Netherlands, people even sat on large rib bones like little sleds to slide on ice, as one variant of skating. Improvisation was key. Any object could become a winter toy in the hands of a playful soul. Inside the homes, winter nights meant more indoor amusements. We have visited storytelling and games by the hearth already, but there were winter-specific ones too. The long evenings around Yuletide, Christmas, were filled with feasting and games. Peasants, even if poor, tried to save a bit of meat or luxuries for the 12 days of Christmas. They might play board games like Fox and Geese or cards if available by the fireside. There's mention of a game called Snapdragon, played in later centuries at Christmas, snatching raisins out of flaming brandy, which might have medieval antecedents in some form of dare games around the hearth. Certainly, the penchant for mild risk and spectacle would fit. One could imagine youths daring each other to snatch a hot coal with bare fingers for a moment for a reward, or to hold a gulp of strong spirits in their mouth and spout it into the fire to make a flare. Dangerous fun, but possible, akin to fire breathing. The centerpiece of winter communal fun was Yuletide feasting and New Year celebrations. A village might gather in the largest home or a barn on Christmas Eve or Twelfth Night to share whatever treats they had. Dense black bread, maybe a salted ham or bacon saved for the occasion, cheese, dried apples, and plenty of home-brewed ale or spiced wine if they could get it. These were rare times of comparative plenty and rest, and thus joy. Singing was integral. Christmas carols, some of which originated in medieval times, were sung in call and response. One popular medieval carol, The Boar's Head, described bringing in a boar's head to the feast with much ceremony, a practice in wealthier households that peasants imitated with maybe a regular pig's head or even a symbolic loaf shaped like a boar if meat was scarce. Such small rituals added festivity. Mumming and gisis peaked during these winter holidays too. As mentioned, the mummers' plays at Christmas and the Feast of Fools around New Year's were major outlets for humor and inversion. The cold outside contrasted with the warmth and laughter inside, as fools capered and mock bishops were elected among the youth, where the lowliest boy in the choir might act as bishop and order people to bring him sweets, for example. The church often tolerated or even encouraged some of this, until later crackdowns, because it kept people content. After all, as one essay put it, such revels were a safety valve for the populace under tough conditions. Midwinter mischief could get rowdy. One example is the Feast of the Ass in some French locales, where on January 14th they led a donkey into church, and everyone brayed "hee-haw" instead of "amen." Peasants found this hilarious. The intrusion of an animal and absurdity into holy space tickled their love of the ludicrous. While religious in setting, it was experienced by them as secular comedic relief from winter gloom. Another winter pastime that commoners indulged in was simply enjoying nature's beauty in quiet ways. On clear, cold nights, families might step out to see the stars or a rare aurora borealis flickering further north. Perhaps not exactly for fun in the sense of games, but a meditative communal awe, which is a form of pleasant recreation. Some might go night walking under full moons on the snow, which reflects moonlight brightly. The crunch of snow underfoot and the silver world around had its own magic. That was a time for courting couples to walk together, or for friends to pay visits carrying lanterns, a serene pleasure distinct to winter's hush. Fire and light were themes of winter fun. To combat long nights, peasants engaged in activities like candle-making bees, where making necessary candles became a social gathering with songs and gossip, and bonfire festivals beyond midsummer, e.g., on Twelfth Night or other midwinter points. The word bonfire, as noted, came from bone fires at midsummer, but certainly winter bonfires existed too, particularly around the new year, perhaps symbolically to chase away the old year's evils. Throughout winter, one of the most comforting amusements was simply resting and napping by the fire, telling stories or singing quiet songs. As one account notes, medieval peasants often had a slower winter pace, even enjoying midday naps and segmented sleep at night. During those wakeful intervals, doing light-hearted things, a quiet two-person board game, teaching children riddles, or embroidering while humming tunes, counted as both productivity and recreation. On particularly bitter days when even stepping outside was difficult, imagine a blizzard blowing, families created their own indoor play. Children might be encouraged to perform little skits or play-act stories they've heard to keep them occupied, effectively a homegrown theater with parents clapping along. Or they could craft small toys from straw and sticks. There's evidence medieval children had simple dolls and hobby horses. Making or playing with these was a joy on cold days. For those who lived near forests or wilds, winter also invited some outdoor ventures for fun that doubled with tasks. For example, men would go hunting small game or ice fishing, not only for necessity, but also the camaraderie and excitement. A group trudging through snow tracking a hare or fox, engaging in friendly rivalry on who could hit it with a sling or arrow. this had an element of sport. Ice fishing through holes in a frozen river was a patient activity, but when they gathered and maybe passed a flask around, it became social. Any catch was cause for celebratory banter. It's barely bigger than a minnow, but we'll call it a feast. In Nordic areas, skiing was both practical and recreational. Scandinavians had skis since ancient times, and while often used for travel or hunting, even reportedly for Viking-era biathlon-like hunts, we can surmise they also had fun with them. Racing on skis or performing stunts, like long jumps off natural mounds, likely occurred given human nature. Indeed, a saga might mention two youths challenging each other on skis. Winter also brought people together in communal charity events that, while earnest, were also a break in routine. If a storm knocked down a cottage or someone needed help, neighbors gathered for a repair bee or to share food. These gatherings often ended in a kind of impromptu mini-feast, or at least communal cheer at having braved adversity. The sense of solidarity was deeply satisfying, a quiet form of fun rooted in fellowship. By the late Middle Ages, some places even had organized winter festivals like the Carnival on Ice in certain Dutch towns, where entire frozen canals hosted markets and games. Peasants from the countryside would flock to these if nearby, marveling at performers on ice, enjoying hot pancakes or spiced ale from stalls, maybe trying their hand at golf on ice, a Dutch golf-like game sometimes played on frozen canals. While such elaborate events were more urban, they inspired rural folk to replicate small versions at home. In the hearts of winter, one finds medieval villagers not merely enduring, but embracing the season's quirks. The lively scene of skaters carving figure eights on a pond, or the cozy vision of a family chuckling over riddles by the hearth during a snowstorm shows a people who discovered warmth in each other and joy in the natural rhythm of the year. As an observer of the time might note, the pace of life in the Middle Ages was slower, and people had lots of free time, even if they didn't have much money. Winter enforced that slow pace, but peasants made the most of it. They caught their breath, literally and figuratively, and turned what could be a season of gloom into one of closeness, creativity, and play. And so, as we draw near the end of our journey through strange medieval amusements, the image lingers of a village blanketed in snow, golden firelight peeking from cottage windows. On the frozen pond just beyond, dark figures glide and play on the ice, their muffled laughter carrying through the still air. Above, the night sky is crystalline with stars. Within each home, bellies are fuller than usual with winter fare, and hearts perhaps fuller too. For in winter, community means survival, and survival is made sweet by moments of shared mirth. The cold may be bitter, but it only makes the warmth of human companionship and merry pastime all the more cherished. Chapter 11. Mischief and Misrule, Carnival Comedy and Upside-Down Traditions. As the last snows melted and the cycle of seasons prepared to renew, medieval villagers partook in one more category of strange fun: the deliberate turning of the world upside down in moments of mischief and misrule. Throughout the year, and especially in the liminal times, carnival season before Lent, New Year, harvest end, common folk embraced customs that temporarily inverted social order and decorum. These were safety valves for society's pressures and also grand entertainments. For a short while, The low could act high, the pious could behave impiously, and everyone could indulge in a bit of sanctioned chaos, all in the spirit of communal fun. One famous example was the tradition of the Lord of Misrule in England and similar figures in Europe. During the Christmas season, or sometimes at New Year or Twelfth Night, a peasant or sub-deacon of the church might be chosen to play the role of mock lord or bishop. This ordinary fellow would be arrayed in outrageous regalia, a paper crown, a scepter that might be a wooden spoon, and granted a make-believe authority to command merriment. The chosen Lord of Misrule led the community in revels, presiding over feasts and dances, and issuing humorous orders, for example, declaring that all must sing a silly song before drinking, or that the local bailiff must carry the jester on his back around the hall. Peasants loved this topsy-turvy play. For one day, the power dynamics were subverted. The lowest of the low became king. Imagine the local miller's awkward apprentice, shy and smudged with flour on normal days, now decked out in motley robes with jingling bells, capering on the manor courtyard dais as Lord of Misrule. He bellows comical edicts. No work today, only play. Let the pigs dine at table and the men roll in the mud. So says Lord Thomas the First. Villagers double over in laughter. Even the actual lord of the manor, if present, might play along magnanimously, offering a toast to the new lord. These rituals were often accompanied by parades of absurdity. In some places, on Feast of Fools, around New Year's, there was a procession where adults dressed as animals or monsters, and a cart would carry the fool bishop through town, while people tossed grain or ashes in light mockery. The medieval Feast of Fools particularly encouraged all participants, clergy and laity alike, to wear masks and disguises, trading identity for a day. Peasants donned homemade masks of goats, bears, devils, or fantastical creatures, and they might invade the church doing comical dances and braying like donkeys in the aisles. Outside, similar revels happened in more secular fashion. Think of it as a medieval carnival parade with no holds barred. This wasn't done in mean-spiritedness, but in a spirit of communal mischief. A way to thumb one's nose at hardship and strictness through humor. Carnival time, just before Lent, typically in February or March, was especially rife with licensed deviants for fun. Across Europe, Carnival was the season of excess and parody. Peasants feasted on richer foods, using up meats and butter before Lent's fasting, and in doing so held events like the Battle of the Meat and the Fish, literally staging a mock fight between people dressed as meat dishes and people dressed as fish, symbolizing the transition to Lenten fasting. Such a battle inevitably was full of clowning, someone costumed as a giant sausage chasing someone as a herring, perhaps. Illustrations from the time show corpulent Carnival personified dueling with lean Lent, often depicted as an old woman or austere figure. Villagers loved physically acting out these allegories. It made the serious religious observance more approachable and even joyful. In some Germanic regions, there were abbeys of misrule, basically youth fraternities that organized pranks. One notorious custom was to elect an abbot of unreason among village youth who would orchestrate pranks like locking a stern alderman in his own stocks overnight or leading a donkey into a scolding neighbor's house. These were dangerous pranks indeed, and often done at night. If caught, participants might face real trouble. but during carnival or certain festivals, authorities looked the other way to a degree. The understanding was, let the young blow off steam now, or they'll cause worse trouble later. Another wild custom, charivaris or rough music, were often punitive, like shaming a wife-beater or a remarrying widow by clanging pots outside their home. But they had an element of carnivalesque fun for those doing it. A charivari might involve an impromptu parade with the victim or couple forced to ride a donkey backward, everyone banging pans and singing mocking rhymes, a humiliating ordeal for them, but a night of uproarious amusement for the rest. It showcased the community's ability to police itself through humor and noise rather than violence, though it could be mean-spirited too. A lighter form of mischief, practical jokes in everyday life. Medieval sources mention servants playing tricks like putting a frog in a miser's soup, or young men swapping a village lady's new baby with a puppy for a moment just to see her reaction. Cruel by our standards, but they found it a hoot when revealed as a joke. On May Day, pranksters might quietly move someone's cart onto a rooftop overnight, or disassemble a neighbor's fence and reassemble it across the road. The victims woke to a confusion that eventually led to laughter once they realized the trick. And usually the culprits were obvious, snickering behind the hedges. Throughout these misrule traditions, an interesting dynamic emerges: collective participation. It wasn't one person pranking another in isolation. It was a whole group colluding in foolery against an individual or a norm. This meant there was rarely malice. It was a social exercise. The whole village, or at least a demographic like the youth or the bachelors, would be in on it, and thus the laughter afterwards was collective as well. The person or institution being mocked was expected to join in the laughter once the point was made. And often they did. A wisely humble priest might chuckle and say, "All right, you rascals, you've had your fun with making me dance in the aisle. Now let's close the feast of fools and clean the church," acknowledging the joke's end. Some of the strangest customs bordered on the surreal. In certain French villages, the Feast of the Ass had the congregation braying like donkeys in a call and response, essentially turning a serious ritual into farce. Everyone enjoyed the absurdity of answering prayers with hee-haw. In Spain, there was Day of the Innocents, Deck 28, like April Fool's Day now, where people played pranks and set others on wild goose chases, telling someone the priest urgently needs them at church when in fact the priest was away. That sort of trick. The fooled one would be called innocent for the day, and they had to laugh along. One should note that authorities sometimes cracked down on misrule when it got out of hand. For example, by the 16th century, some kings and church officials banned the Lord of Misrule and Feast of Fools. Henry VIII in England banned it in 1541. Pope and others condemned it. This suggests that medieval mischief occasionally grew too rowdy or challenged authority too directly. But in the high medieval period we're focusing on, such customs were still largely permitted because they served a social function. They reinforced order by allowing disorder briefly. Peasants, through these carnivals of madness, actually affirmed the social order by symbolically overthrowing it and then returning to normal, a kind of pressure release valve. For the peasants themselves, these occasions were thrilling. They broke monotony and let imaginations run wild. A farmhand who spent his days trudging behind oxen could one night be king of fools. wearing a robe of sackcloth and a crown of ivy, being cheered by all. A shy milkmaid could wear a demon mask and frighten the snooty miller, reversing their usual power dynamic. The world turned topsy-turvy was a source of endless jokes and tales afterward. People would reminisce. Remember when old Jacques had to sing that silly song hopping on one leg because the boy bishop ordered it? I thought I'd die laughing. These memories were cherished. They also allowed subtle social commentary. By making fun of a greedy priest in a play, perhaps that priest would take the hint and be more humble, or at least the people felt better having expressed their feelings safely. The atmosphere during these misrule events was a particular kind of joy, a bit drunken, often literally, ale flowed liberally then, daring and communal. It had the excitement of naughtiness with the comfort that it was allowed naughtiness, perhaps akin to modern festivals like Mardi Gras or certain fools' festivals that survive in parts of Europe today, where for a day people wear costumes, satirize leaders, and dance in the street. As evening fell on a day of misrule, you'd find villagers exhausted from laughter, costumes askew, and an afterglow of satisfaction. They would escort the Lord of Misrule to abdicate his throne with playful ceremony, maybe dunking him in the horse trough as a finale, to much hilarity. Then crown the real village headman again, symbolically. Life would then flow back to normal. Plows next morning, respectful doffing of caps to the priest, though one might wink because he saw the priest play a fool earlier. But a subtle relaxation of tension and a renewed bond among villagers remained. They had all been fools together, showing that under the rigid roles they were all just human, all capable of laughter and folly. In the grand tapestry of medieval fun, these episodes of mischief and misrule add vibrant, riotous color. They reveal that medieval peasants were far from dour. They possessed an earthy sense of humor and a boldness to play with the very structures that governed them. Through a carnival lens, they confronted fear of authority, of the sacred, of the unknown, and turned it into something they could laugh at. That empowered them in a small but meaningful way. And so, as our exploration winds to a close, we leave the medieval village, perhaps, on the night after a feast of fools. The bonfire in the square burns low. A few leftover streamers of last week's mumming play flutter on the oak branch. The villagers sleep deeply, dreaming perhaps of the merriment they shared, and secure in the knowledge that come the next festival, they will turn their world upside down and laugh together again. In their humble, hard lives, these moments of sanctioned silliness were golden. Truly, even in an age often branded as dark or grim, the human spirit, ever resilient, found lightness and laughter, proving that fun and folly are as old and enduring as mankind itself. Chapter 12. Epilogue. The gentle nightfall of medieval mirth. The village grows quiet now. We have wandered through its seasons and celebrations, seen its people at work and at play, and listened to their songs and laughter. In the embers of the hearth, in the fading echo of a farce's punchline, in the last skater gliding home under the moon, we find a profound sense of peace. This world we've visited, of medieval peasants finding fun in strange things, is at once alien in its customs and familiar in its humanity. For though the particular games and pastimes change with centuries, The heart that seeks joy at day's end is timeless. As we let the images of these chapters settle, a calm reflection emerges. Life for the medieval peasant was not solely toil and suffering, as it's sometimes portrayed. It was also filled with moments of light, stolen afternoons of sport, fire-lit evenings of story and song, communal festivals where cares were set aside. They crafted merriment from whatever was at hand. A scrap of bone became a skate, a pig's bladder became a football, a simple tale became an enchanting performance. They proved resourceful in joy as much as in labor. Even their strangest amusements, the rowdy wrestling matches, the absurd theater with fart jokes, the wild inversion of a lord of misrule, carried a wisdom. The wisdom that laughter and play are not luxuries, but necessities of the spirit. Consider the gentle scene at a day's close. A peasant family gathered on their doorstep, watching fireflies dance over summer fields after a rousing game of blind man's buff. Children lean against their parents, pleasantly tired, still giggling occasionally at the game's funniest moment. From a neighboring cottage, someone softly strums a lute, a simple melody that mingles with the evening breeze. Across the lane, two young lovers, just betrothed, sit on a fence, whispering excitedly about the antics at the fair today and making plans for the dance at their upcoming wedding, which surely will last 3 days and fill the night with music and cheerful noise. The stars blink into view one by one. Though the village has no streetlights or modern entertainments, it is far from cheerless. A contentment born of camaraderie and honest pleasures pervades the dusk. From this distance of centuries, we can admire how balanced their lives could be. Hard work tempered by hearty play. They instinctively knew to celebrate whenever they could. To mark a good harvest, not just with thanks, but with feasting and games. To ease winter's bite with story and sport. To greet spring not only with planting, but with dancing around the maypole, twirling in hope and delight. In those acts, we sense a reverence for life's cyclical nature, a joy in time's passing moments. It's also striking how communal every pastime was. In a world without much privacy or individual mobility, fun was something you created together. Perhaps that is why their entertainments feel so warm to imagine. Nearly everything was shared. A game of 9 pins involved the whole neighborhood. A storytelling session meant all ages huddled by one fire. A prank on a feast day was concocted by many and laughed at by the entire village. They lived tightly knit, and so they played in unison. That togetherness gave their leisure a profound depth, each person's laughter reinforcing the others, weaving a social fabric strong enough to withstand adversity. The tone of their fun, as we set out to capture, was calm and atmospheric when needed. Think of serene skating on a frozen pond, or the low murmur of a lullaby after the excitement of a snowball fight. It was also exuberant and carefree at times, the shouts of merriment at a football game, the belly laughs at a farce play. But throughout, there was an underlying gentleness. Medieval mirth, especially among peasants, often had a quality of innocence within earthiness. They laughed at crude jokes, yes, and sometimes played rough, but there was a simple honesty in that. They did not over-intellectualize their fun. It came from natural impulses, to move, to sing, to jest, to pretend. In embracing those, they tapped into something universal and healing. As the night fully descends on our imaginary village, the last lights wink out one by one. Perhaps in one hut, an old grandfather stirs from first sleep and tends the fire. He sits for a moment, gazing at the glowing coals. In the silence, maybe he recalls a memory, the harvest dance of his youth, when he danced under the stars with the woman who became his wife. He can almost hear the distant faint tune of a fiddle on the breeze of memory. He smiles softly in the dark. The fire crackles, throwing comforting shadows. In a while, he will doze off again. But for now, he is filled with a quiet joy, grateful for the life he's had. Hard, yes, but also graced with laughter, music, and love. It is time for us, too, to leave this quaint village of long ago. We slip away gently, carrying with us the lessons its people offered in how to find contentment in simple pleasures. They showed us that even in an age with no modern conveniences and much uncertainty, humans crafted a rich culture of play and celebration. Through unusual games and secular diversions, they affirmed life's sweetness amid hardship. They remind us that no matter the era, we share the same need to relax, to be silly, to gather and connect, to feel the same childlike delight we saw in their faces. In our imagination, we take one last look. Dawn is just a hint on the horizon now, a pale blue light. A rooster crows. Soon the village will stir to another day of work. But something is different. It's the day of the summer fair, or the Saint's Day when no labor is done. Instead of plows, the villagers will bring out tables and kegs, prepare games, dress in their best, and welcome travelers to join the fun. There's excitement in the air. The children hardly slept, anticipating the puppet show and sack race. The adults exchange knowing glances. A break will do them all good. Today, toil is set aside, and joy takes center stage. We leave them on that hopeful note, the strange and wonderful amusements awaiting like bright pennants fluttering in the morning breeze. Perhaps, as we depart, we feel a bit of their hope and lightness linger with us. The medieval night we explored was not dark after all. It was aglow with laughter and togetherness, calm at times, exuberant at others, always deeply human. Now, returning to our own time, we carry this calm, meditative memory that somewhere in the tapestry of history, there was a humble village where people wrestled and danced, skated and sang, jested and dreamed under the same sky we live under now. And as we drift to rest, we might fancy that if we listen closely, beyond the veil of time, we can hear an echo on the wind, the faint strains of a medieval fiddle, the distant laughter of peasants at play, strange and sweet, comforting as a lullaby from ages past.